Welcome for the third Plato Phaedo reading, getting into the mind and soul of Plato and thus his teacher Socrates. Anybody who wants to get an intro into this, I suggest read the text, which is in the description box below this video. Also, it's always useful. You could read or listen to the reading and discussion of the first and second session, which are also linked in the description box. But to make things a little bit easier and smoother for people who might have just forgotten some of the ideas that were developed last week, or who just might be listening in for the first time today, we got Brandy, who has volunteered yet again to essentially
scripted
the ideas.
Okay, so where do you want me to start?
Maybe some of the elements, the core elements of where we left off in terms of what was Simmias and Cebes throwing at Socrates that might have been a little bit challenging and a bit demoralizing for people who were listening in, thinking that they finally were resolved, that there is an immortality to the soul, and then all of a sudden maybe there were some doubts, some cause for doubt thrown out there by a couple of young pups.
Right. Okay. So Simmias. Let's see, let me look at my notes. I remember. Okay, right. So Simmias fears that the soul is invisible and though more divine and excellent than the body, may perish first. So he uses the analogy of like a lyre or an instrument and attunement or harmony, as some of the other translations use. And he says the soul, well, he's basically assuming that the soul is like a harmony. So, and the harmony or attunement is a compound. It's a mix of different elements. It's the instrument, it's the string, somebody playing it. So he's equating the soul to this compound that's made of different parts. So if the body is like the lyre and the soul is the attunement, a mixture of the elements, then the soul predeceases the body. Because if you break the instrument, then the attunement is no longer there, or it's lost, or can't be achieved. So basically, yeah, that's his argument. Basically, how do we know that the soul doesn't perish because some of the parts die, i.e. the body?
Mm-hmm.
And does anybody have anything to add to that one before I go on to the CDs?
Well, I thought he said that the body is the one that is a compound and the soul is not a compound. But maybe I'm not at my best today, so I don't know what.
Maybe I misunderstood it, but I did understand it like the attunement to be a mixture of different elements. So maybe I'm misusing the word compound, because I know
compound
that
applies
several
to the
times.
body. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Anybody
that's
else?
That's a good gist. That's the good idea of that concept, though. I think that's solid. That as he's like, but if the body is like the instrument and the body being a compound, slowly dissipates as we die, then doesn't the soul dissipate too, just like the harmony does as the instrument loses its form, it loses its tunement, and as it goes out of tune and the strings break, isn't that like the soul dissipating? Crisis, existential crisis time. So that's one theory thrown out there.
Okay.
I always like to think of the soul as something like a diamond or a crystal that's indestructible, or nearly so. Just putting that thought out there.
Careful thinking about the diamond or a crystal, which is still it's still a compound with many parts. And we can't say that in a zillion years it will still be there. We don't know. Probably if it's material, it's probably going to change in some way. So there's
perhaps,
yeah.
Right.
Lots
and then
of possibilities with crystals.
Oh, excuse me.
Go on, Brandy.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought somebody was speaking. So Cebes uses the analogy of the weaver and the coat or the cloak, and his doubt or question is that even though we know the soul survives the death of some of the bodies, how do we know that it doesn't wear itself out and die at some point once it's done experiencing different bodies. And that the analogy of the weaver and the coat, basically the soul is like the weaver, if I understand it, and the coat is like the body. And at some point, although some of the coats or cloaks will outlast the weaver, the very last one that he's wearing when he dies will outlast him. So at some point, then even though death, so then death is the destruction of the soul after it, that is, I guess he's suggesting that might be a plausible option. So he's not convinced by Socrates' arguments up to that point.
Do people agree with that theory as well, or that she did a good job? Because I think that's a pretty good job.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right, cool. Is there anything else that people would like to throw out there that would be worth holding in mind?
I'm going to ask for 1 or 2 minutes to go over a point that I believe was glossed over in the very first session, but which is key to Socrates' definition of what is philosophy. So if you want to go, and I checked it with 2 other translations I have, Benjamin Jowett and W.G.D. Rouse, and they all say the same thing in slightly different words. When he's describing that pleasure and pain thing after removing the chains are removed, he goes on to say something rather interesting. He says, philosophy is the highest composition of music. And this is in connection with the question he's asked, why did you compose poems? No, because this other guy, Evenus, I think, feels that you're trying to compete with him. And so he explains that he used to get repeatedly dreams which urged him to compose music. Socrates, go and keep on making music. And he explains that he then thought perhaps the dreams are telling him to compose music in the popular sense of the word, which is to say the way most people understand music, which is that is an external production of sounds to tunes. So in honor of that possible interpretation, he then composes some verses and a hymn to Apollo. But what he's also saying over there, although it's not paid much attention to, is that the philosophy that he defines, interestingly, as the highest composition of music is not that popular sense of the term. If you want to go back to the first few pages, Matthew, I'll leave that up to you. But this, I'm pretty sure this is what is there. And the connection I wanted to make is there is a concept in Hinduism and Sikhism that there is something called the Anhad Nad or Anhad Shabad, which is the unstruck sound, unstruck word, which can be heard by certain rare souls by going within. And although Socrates doesn't call it hearing music, he calls it making music. What I'm interpreting that as his dreams are telling him to keep on meditating so that music is heard. I just wanted to throw that out there. If you want to have a quick look at those words from your own text, that's up to you. And then
only due to the fact that the time limit is well, the time is limited by virtue of it being time, but that's a whole other philosophical issue. But we do have a limited amount of time this evening for our reading, so I plan on finishing it tonight. However, what you just said is a highly important concept, and I do encourage people to dig back into and review that concept and that very concept of what philosophy and what the pursuit of wisdom actually is, as far as an idea related to poetry, music, composition, which in the mindset of a Plato are not different things, nor are they really different from the mindset of a Ben Franklin or a Leonardo da Vinci. When you read the writings of those people who are really potent souls, tapping into this source, and I'm sure, not having been an expert as much as you are, Harinder, of Hindu philosophy, I'm sure that this is the exact same thing that one finds again and again there too, that there's no absolute walls separating the different category or ways of thinking poetically, scientifically, philosophically. These are all different parts of the same thing. It's more just in our dysfunctional age that boxes have been put separating each of the modes, which separate us from the very source that we yearn for. So I think it's a
I
good
have a question.
Mhm.
And apologies if I missed it. This is my first time going through this reading.
Sure.
So it's nice to do it and a collective, but is there any assumption or question around, is the soul a static, an unchanging thing? Or
He says
does it
that
actually
it's already
grow
been
and
covered.
change over-
He says Socrates actually raised that. It was in one of the previous readings that the soul is unchanging and the body is changing. That is covered in the earlier presentation.
Got it.
All right, let's do it. So let me hit a screen share here, and we'll jump into this. Uh-oh, I hit the wrong thing. Forgive me, bear with me. I have far too many windows open right now. There we are. Okay. So I guess. Okay, can people see the text?
All good.
All good?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Make it bigger. Okay. And I think one thing that also struck me too, just to keep in mind, is he did bring in the example of the warning to future thinkers who sometimes will make the mistake of becoming misanthropes or haters of ideas, haters of men and haters of people, which have a common thread. And you guys remember that how he reasoned through that one? Somebody want to do a quick recap of that warning, how he was thinking about that? Because I think it's so valuable for people today as well, where there's so much misinformation that's resulting in people becoming anti-philosophers.
Yeah, maybe I would like to do it in 1 minute.
Yeah, sure. Quan, go for it.
Okay, I think that the warning that Socrates gave is that if you are too naive and your mind is not yet quite developed and you gave your love or your interest into someone that you discover afterwards was not the quality person that you thought he was or she was, that might dampen your mood on your epistemological journey. Okay, so probably it's the most difficult step in life because you need to know where you are in your journey to logos. Okay, I will use logos from now on since we are in the Greek dialogue. If you're at logos 1 or 2 or 3, you're not yet in logos 4, 5, and 6. So it's not the time to be discouraged and to relinquish your epistemological journey. And I think it's very important that he tackled that question, because for someone at logos 4 or 5, or even at logos 3.5, that advice is not so important. It's rather for the people at logos 1 or 2 who might be discouraged to keep on the epistemological journey, because the people at 3, 4, 5, they can manage for themselves.
Matthew, I'll just add one line to that. I think what Socrates is saying is that if you do not quickly accept certain arguments without properly understanding them, because your mind is not properly matured.
It's right here. I'm just trying to turn it up for you.
Hello?
Yeah, you're there. It's okay.
Yeah, you're there.
Okay,
Someone just talked.
So if I can just finish that part.
Yes.
He's saying, you may, if you too naively or too prematurely accept certain ideas, you may later on turn against them, because you then find yourself disagreeing with them later on, and then you may become a hater of such ideas. And he gives the same example with people. He says, if you too quickly fall in with certain people, and then you feel betrayed later on, you may become a hater of humanity as well.
Yeah.
And one of the conclusions he derives from that also, he says, using that very argument, you should also examine what I am saying as Socrates, and not just uncritically accept it because it is Socrates who is saying it. You should only accept what I'm saying if you yourselves believe what I'm saying is the truth. So he's encouraging them to also examine everything that he himself is saying at a deep level, using those same foundations of
Yes.
hatred of discourse, etc.
Yes, because he doesn't want them to necessarily be happy with the right idea or the right opinion, but with the bad foundation that could result in them not only losing their true opinion later on, but also becoming haters of the very idea. For this moment, we're talking about the immortality of the soul. So if you believe in the immortal soul, but you believe it for naive reasons that are not really true knowledge, then it will be that much more easy when you encounter a more sophisticated argument, as poor Bertrand. I was thinking of Bertrand Russell when I heard this, because Bertrand Russell is both a misanthrope, somebody who devoutly hates humanity, but at the same time, he's somebody who also cynically made famous this refutation that Socrates' soul is immortal, using the Aristotelian syllogism that all men are mortal. You know, this pompous theoretician says, he's like, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, thus Socrates is mortal. Thus he is wrong about the immortality of the soul. And he's like acting really sophisticated because he, when he was young, was kind of a naive romantic when it came to matters of the soul. And it didn't take long for him to enter Cambridge and encounter, you know, very sophisticated arguments that prove that his silly or his infantile ideas were wrong. And then he became a very hater of the very philosophy that presumed a soul, as well as human beings more generally. So yeah, I think it's a good, he's so proud, right, that Cebes and Simmias were able to provide we're able to see sort of holes in his argument previously, and he's happy, and everybody else is probably thinking like, well, why are you happy? Shouldn't you be more depressed that they just found holes in your argument? So now we're gonna proceed onward and see why Socrates is so proud of these young students of his. So who wants to be Socrates today?
I can continue if nobody or somebody else.
Bruce. I'd love to.
Oh, we got a Bruce. Okay, so Herinder, why don't you play Cebes today?
All right.
Okay, Bruce is Socrates, Herinder is Cebes. Who wants to be Simmias?
I'll do Simmias again.
All right, Vince, you're Simmias. If other players come onto the stage, we'll call upon somebody new. So let's maybe just recap with Socrates.
Matt, can you bring it up just one more notch?
I can do that. How's that?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, go for it.
This is Socrates.
This is Socrates.
All right. From Simmias and Cebes,
Sure.
I am now fully prepared to embark upon the discussion. You, however, if you take my advice, should pay little regard to Socrates and much more regard to the truth. And if I actually seem to you to be saying anything true, then you should agree. But if not, you should resist with every possible argument, being careful lest in my eagerness I deceive both myself and yourselves at the same time and depart like a bee, leaving my sting behind. Let us proceed then, he said. First, the two of you should remind me of what you have said in case I have actually forgotten. Yes, I think Simmias had doubts and was afraid lest the soul, even though it is more divine and more beautiful than the body, might perish before it, as it is in a kind of attunement. I think Cebes, on the other hand, agreed with me over this, that the soul is longer lasting than the body. But he says that it is not obvious to anyone that the soul, having repeatedly worn out many bodies, will not itself perish when it leaves the last body. And this may be death, the destruction of the soul, since the body is always perishing unceasingly. So Simmias and Cebes, are these the issues we need to consider?
And that's you, Matthew.
They both agreed.
Great. Now, do you reject all of the previous arguments, or do you accept some and reject others?
We accept some and reject others.
Well, he said, what do you say about the argument in which we stated that learning is recollection? And since this is the case, it necessarily follows that our soul existed elsewhere before she was imprisoned in the body?
I found it wonderfully persuasive at the time, and I still do now more than any argument.
Yes, indeed. I share the same view, and I would be very surprised if I ever found myself holding a different opinion about it.
But you will have to hold a different opinion, my Theban friend, if you persist with the idea that an attunement is a compound entity and the soul is an attunement constituted from the elements of the body once they are in tune. For I presume you would not accept the suggestion that an attunement may be constituted before there were the elements from which it must be composed, or would you accept this?
Not at all, Socrates.
Now, are you aware that these are the consequences of what you propose whenever you assert that the soul exists before it enters the form and body of a human being? And on the other hand, that it is constituted from elements that do not yet exist? For your attunement and what you are comparing it to are not really alike. No, the lyra, strings, and sounds come into existence first, and they are not tuned at that stage, but the attunement is established last of all, and it is first to perish. So how will this argument be harmonized with the other one in your view?
That is not possible at all.
But surely an argument about attunement should be harmonious, if any argument should be.
It should.
Then your argument is not in harmony. So decide, which of the arguments do you prefer? That learning is recollection, or that the soul is an attunement?
I much prefer the former, Socrates, for this occurred to me without any proof, based upon a certain likelihood and plausibility, which is why most people hold this view. However, I am conscious that arguments which construct their proof on the basis of likelihoods are impostors, and if we are not alert to them, they're extremely deceptive, both in geometry and in everything else. But the argument about recollection and learning was expounded through an hypothesis which deserved acceptance, for it was said, I presume, that our soul exists before it enters the body just as surely as its being, bearing the name what is, exists. And I'm convinced that I have accepted this in an appropriate and correct manner. So for these reasons, it seems that I must not accept my own or anyone else's assertion that soul is an attunement.
But what about this, Simmias? Do you think it is natural for an attunement or any other compound entity to be in a different condition than the condition of the elements from which it is constituted?
Not at all.
Or indeed, I imagine with the compound, do anything or experience anything else besides what the elements either do or experience?
He concurred.
So it is natural for an attunement not to lead the elements it is composed of, but to follow them.
I agree.
Then an attunement is quite unable to move in opposition or sound in opposition or be opposed in any way to its own parts.
Yes, quite unable.
What about this? Is not each attunement by nature an attunement as it has been tuned?
I do not understand.
Well, if it had been more tuned or tuned to a greater extent, assuming that can actually happen, it would be more an attunement and to a greater extent. And if it had been less tuned or tuned to a lesser extent, it would be less an attunement and an attunement to a lesser extent.
Yes, certainly.
Now, does this also apply to the soul, so that however slightly one soul is more what it is than another? Is it more and to a greater extent, or less or to a lesser extent a soul?
Not in any way.
Come on, then, by Zeus, do we say that one soul has reason and virtue and is good, while another has ignorance and wickedness and is bad? And is it true to say this?
It is true indeed.
Now, what will any of those who assert that the soul is an attunement say that these things, virtue and the vice, in our souls are. Are they some further separate attunement or non-attunement? And does the attuned soul, the good one, even though it is an attunement, also have another attunement within itself? While the one that is not attuned is just itself and does not have another attunement within it?
I cannot tell, but whoever proposes that hypothesis would obviously be saying something of that sort.
But we have already agreed that one soul is not more or less a soul than another. And this is the agreement that one attunement is not more an attunement or an attunement to a greater extent or less an attunement or an attunement to a lesser extent than another one. Is this so?
Yes, certainly.
And being neither more nor less an attunement, it is neither more nor less attuned. Is this the case?
It is.
And does that which is neither more nor less attuned partake of attunement to a greater extent, to a lesser extent, or to an equal extent?
Equal.
Now, since one soul is no more or less what it is than another one, namely a soul, then it is neither more nor less attuned.
Quite so.
And if it is characterized this way, it could not partake of attunement or lack of attunement to any greater extent, could it?
It could not.
And what is more, if it is characterized this way, could one soul partake of virtue or vice to a greater extent than another one? If vice is indeed a lack of attunement and virtue is an attunement?
Not to a greater extent, no.
Rather, Simius, according to the correct argument, if soul is indeed an attunement, no soul will partake of vice. For obviously, an attunement, being completely an attunement, would never partake of lack of attunement.
No, indeed.
Nor, of course, would a soul, being completely a soul, partake of vice.
No, how could it? Based upon what we said earlier, at least.
So, based upon this argument, we find that the souls of all living beings will be equally good, since souls are by nature equally what they are, namely souls.
That is how it seems to me anyway, Socrates.
And do you think this has been well argued, and would the argument have ended up in this predicament if the hypothesis that the soul is an attunement was correct?
Not at all.
What about this? Of all the elements in a person, is there anything else that rules according to you except soul, especially if it also possesses understanding?
I do not think so.
Now, does it act in agreement with the affections of the body or in opposition to them? I mean, in situations where there is heat or thirst within the body, soul draws it in the opposite direction, away from drinking. And when there is hunger, it draws the hunger away from eating. And presumably, we are aware of countless other examples of the soul opposing the affections of the body. Is this not so?
Yes, certainly.
Furthermore, did we not agree earlier that if the soul is an attunement, it would never strike a note in opposition to the tensions, relaxations, vibrations, or any other experiences which its constituents undergo? Rather, it would follow them and never act as leader?
We did agree. How could one disagree?
But look, do we not now find the soul exemplifying behavior which is the complete opposite, leading all these elements of which some say it is composed, opposing them throughout life in almost everything, and dominating them in every way? Sometimes it chastises them more severely with painful processes based upon gymnastics or medicine, sometimes more gently by threatening and admonishing, talking to the desires, passions, and fears as though they constituted a separate entity. I suppose it is like what Homer wrote in the Odyssey, where Odysseus says, he smote his breast and rebuked his heart with the words, "Endure, my heart, you have endured far worse." Now, who's this? I guess it's still Socrates.
I think so.
Now, Do you think he wrote this in the belief that soul is an attunement, the sort of thing which is led by the affections of the body, rather than leading them and dominating them, as it is a far more divine entity than any attunement?
By Zeus, Socrates, I do not think so.
Then, my excellent friend, it is not at all appropriate for us to state that soul is an attunement. For it seems we would be disagreeing with the divine poet Homer and with ourselves.
That is how the matter stands.
In that case, it seems we have somehow placated the Theban goddess Harmonia quite well, but Cebus, what about Cadmus? How shall we placate him?
So
And
let's
with
just take
what
a
argument?
let's just take a quick moment here. Does anybody have a thought or a question that they want to toss out based on this very, very quick series of debunking proofs about the Simius concept, or how Simius was naively thinking about the soul in this case as an attunement? We don't have to, but just curious if people are.
I
Does
think
it
here we
matter
have
how
a-
we define attunement, Matt?
That matters.
Because
That matters because he's thinking about it in this context in a very specific way. Yeah.
yeah, because I was thinking if you change to another noun, attuner, that which attunes, or the entity which attunes, there might be something else may come out of this argument.
I think you might be onto
Reason we
something.
cannot-
But I think Peter, you are good player with word, because if you say the attuner, you would be saying something almost equivalent to being, and precisely I think that is the most powerful argument here about the fact that there is a stark difference between the attuner or the being and the becoming. And this, the paragraph, the 2-3 paragraphs when he was speaking about the fact that the soul will not be obeying to the vibrations or the disease or the good states of the body is precisely, for me, the most powerful intellectual argument for the presence of something that is unchanging and always the same in all circumstances. And just below the true experience of formless awareness, which is something that you have to experience. But intellectually, if you use words, those 3 paragraphs are probably, for me, the center of the dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
This attunement, is that like saying, like, in the process of improving the soul? Is that kind of the same thing as attunement?
Well, yes, you're right, because here that is the distinction that he would make. The soul by itself cannot be an attunement, because he gave 3 arguments for that. Okay, if it's an attunement, it means that some soul would be greater soul or lesser souls, and the soul by definition is something unchangeable and unmoving. So you cannot have different degree of souls. Okay, but the attunement is not about the existence or the substance of the soul. The attunement is about are you remembering? Okay, because here you have the connection or the bridging of the 2 theories. Okay, the recollection theory, meaning that the soul that truly remember who he is or who she is would be more capable to be in a healthy state, and that would be the attunement, but not the substance of the soul. The substance of the soul is the basic fundamental substance, is the being, so it cannot be an attunement. But the attunement is at the other level. If you remember your basic substance of being, you would be attuned in the sense that you would be healthier, versus the non-virtuous soul, which would be disease, if you want. And there, the attunement can be used as an argument, but not for the being or the substance of the soul itself.
Sorry, Squan, I have to slightly disagree with you, because in this very argument, Socrates comes to the conclusion that all souls are the same, and he explains the reasoning behind that. And the idea of attunement cited by Simmias was that just as a musical instrument is played to a certain tune, the tune follows. And so he's saying, as the body has come to life, that the soul merely appears as an attunement. That's what he is trying to say. That's the meaning in which he is using the term attunement, something that just accompanies the body. And therefore, when the body is destroyed, the accompaniment will also disappear. That's the way he uses the term attunement.
That's Simmias. That's the way Simmias is.
I'm talking about Simmias's definition. Yeah.
Yes, and I agree with you, Harinder. that is the materialistic interpretation of the soul by Simmias. That is, he considered the soul as a secondary product of the harmony of the parts of the body.
That's right.
And that I understood perfectly, and I agree with you. What I meant here by the attunement is not in the sense of Simmias, okay? The soul is being, so it is not composite, and it cannot be the result of an attunement. Perfect. But what I meant by the meaning of attunement by Socrates is that a healthy soul would be in attunement because he remembers himself as the center of reality. And when he does not remember himself at the center of reality, that would be a soul that would be not healthy. In that sense, that is the Socratic meaning of attunement, and not the meaning given by Simmias, pretending that the soul is a secondary product of the attunement of the composite part of the body.
Yeah, it's really important to have the two different states of reality that coexist in the mind hierarchically when dealing with these types of Platonic dialogues, because a lot of people naively think of harmony and they think of just the type of harmony you can hear, which is what Simmias is thinking about, the type that is emanating in the world, struck by the ear, and thus when the instrument gets old, that harmony that was created in the instrument when the instrument maker made it dies away too. And if you think of it just from its material expression, then yeah, that might throw you into a funk when you're thinking, well, maybe the soul is like that is a material thing too.
Yes.
Versus the higher idea that you guys were just playing with now of the higher realm of of being in the divine sense that doesn't perish, that is always, and that's at the heart of the theory of why knowledge can be through remembrance.
Yes. And that's why the three paragraphs where Socrates were giving practical examples during which the soul is always in opposition to the state of the body is the most powerful intellectual argument for the difference between being and becoming. Okay, the most obvious, the most easy to understand, the easiest to understand.
Yeah, because that's when we all suffer, seductions of any sort, food or anything else the body might yearn for. If we want to become better and wiser, there's something within us that has to intervene on us, on the body's impulses, and bring it to a higher virtue. So that soul that yearns to be healthy, that recognizes that something will be less healthy by giving way to something which is making it less, has to be in conflict, but that's not very harmonious. So there's something about the body and the soul which are not exactly the same as what Simmias was thinking about.
Yeah, and that is called technically the argument of the two opposing nature. And wow, that's the classical question of all meditation masters. Okay, what is always present in all circumstances of your life? What is the stuff that is always present? The soul. Okay, either if your body is vibrating positively or negatively or neutrally, the only thing that is always the same and which not go with the positive, negative, and neutral vibrations of the body is something that is called the soul. Or you can call it as you want, okay, but we call it the soul.
Hence he calls the soul good, not more. Like first they were talking about more or less, and then
yes,
they said it was a good, whatever that means.
Yeah, and that is the second argument. Okay, if you can talk about more or less attunement for the soul, it means that the soul is not unchanging and perfectly the same in all circumstances.
But he's not.
On my Navy experience as a navigator, I always had to know where north was. And once I figured out north, I could do everything else. And
Yes.
so I meant aligning my navigational equipment and my mind to north as I understood it. And if I got where I was going, things were working. I'm throwing out imperfect illustrations from my own experience, and I'm just sharing that.
No,
Is
that's the
that like-
substance of that's the substance of good poetry. Thus,
You
good
could
poetry.
use a music. You could use a musical example here too, if you like, similar to the one that Peter just used. That when you're playing music, I mean, as a drummer in particular, I suppose, you're in a separate relationship with time. You know, the temporal world is still going on, but when you're playing music, you're existing in a musical time, which is just a little bit different. Well, can often be quite different to normal time, if you like. But it's the awareness of both at the same time.
Yeah.
And which one you have to pay attention to function.
You're setting your soul's compass to goodness, truth, and beauty.
Yeah, I think awareness is the word that I'm hinting at there. You know, that your awareness can shift, depending on circumstances.
Yes, and your awareness can shift not in a haphazard manner, because you learn how to abide in your being.
So yeah, there's a disciplined approach to your awareness.
Exactly, and I think that music is the perfect example. Okay, because music is probably the experience in time that can bring you to timelessness very easily. Okay, and I'm thinking about classical music, of course. You just listen to John Sebastian Bach. Okay, you will be in timelessness. Okay, you can be in timelessness in 30 seconds. So it would take a very short time to be in timelessness with Bach.
I mean, musicians will often talk about this, and I know it's happened to me once in a while, where you're in the middle of a performance and suddenly you kind of realize, you know, it's like coming out of a dream, that that you are in a state where your sense of time and your sense of reality is very, very different. You know, communicating with everybody on stage, producing what you're producing. And when you're not aware of it, that's when you do it the best. And suddenly you snap out of that. And it's kind of like, gosh, I wish I could go back to that sense of what I just had.
Yeah, exactly.
Acting, whenever I've done a play, and I've had and you've worked so hard to learn your lines, and the last thing you need is to forget them. But when you go on, you just forget your line. You forget to worry about it, and you just don't, you know that you're going to go up there and do it the right way. And so it reminds me of that sort of thing where you're almost in another world. You're in a mini world on that stage, and the stage is the world.
Yep.
And that's how you have to act. I don't know.
No, these are great thoughts. This is cool. Well, yeah, there's definitely a something. I think you tend to get it in sports. You know, even Michael Jordan. I remember listening to an interview where he described being in the zone. You know, the question of the cherished zone that athletes yearn to tap into, but they all sort of describe a very similar process where space and time kind of slow down. There, everything is just sort of seen as a whole that's more than the sum of its parts. And musicians, artists sort of tap into this. It's not something you can always be in necessarily, but it's something that that there's some common threads throughout it, dealing with the timeless, and just letting go of your ego, being fully honest in an experience, right? That has a creative impulse to it.
Being in a state of non-thinking.
Well, I'll just add something here. Maybe it is my function to always provide a slightly dissenting note, but I'll remind you of what Socrates said in the earlier part of in the last session, where he says, the soul has to withdraw itself into itself and stay away from everything having to do with the body, its thoughts, its desires, its fancies, and so on, in order to attain a state of purity. Otherwise, it will be addicted to the needs and desires of the body and be weighted down with those things and remain impure. So when we are talking about being in the zone, we may still be talking about a bodily thing. I'll just leave that there, okay? But because that's what he's fundamentally saying. The soul, if it is to rise to a higher dimension, it has to be completely disabused of everything having to do with the body, and attain that state of purity where it learns to be only by itself, with itself, uncontaminated by anything to do with the body. And that can mean being in the zone, playing music, listening to Bach, etc., because those are external things that you listen to Bach through your physical ears, and he's talking about something else, going inside and being by itself. So I'll just leave it there.
Well, I think the question that it's a good paradox you're throwing out there. I think Socrates would be happy with that. But I think the question of like, oh, sorry, Kwan, yeah, go for it.
No, okay, okay. I wouldn't take 1 minute. Okay. I think here I would like to come back to the notion of anahat that Harinder mentioned at the beginning precisely. Okay, because anahat is a chakra of the heart, and it corresponds exactly to the fourth layer of the mind. It means beauty. And here is my hypothesis. There are some reality that are created by man having attained to anahat or to the upper trigram or to the timeless dimension. And I would like to mention again back, but it cannot, it can be anything, okay? Some men, because they reach to that timeless dimension, they are capable to create a certain pieces of art that would resonate with us on the lower trigram, that would make precisely a resonance between the lower trigram and the upper trigram. However, I think that Harinder is right in the sense that in your epistemological journey, you might have to go through a period that you would deprive yourself relatively of the excitement of the lower trigram in order to be more capable to see your soul precisely. Because once again, educare, to bring forth what is from within, is to make the soul remember himself or herself. So in the epistemological journey, in the personal education process, yes, there are times that you need to deprive yourself from too much senses excitation. I would agree with him on that for this, but I would say that if there are some timeless creation, like for example, the art of the fugue by Bach, that is in resonance, but on the lower realm, uplifting people to the timeless dimension, I would say that though we have to deprive ourselves of eternal creation by geniuses, bringing us to the timeless dimension, because it's not the same kind of time excitation than, let's say, some pop music, which is of much lower value. I would say that some creations manifesting in time are resonating so much with timelessness that they are not in the same category for me than ordinary time excitations. I don't know if I expressed myself clearly. I stop here.
I would just add to that the thought that Bertrand Russell, who I just thought about him earlier, so I'll bring him up again. He liked classical music. He liked listening to classical music, but a lot of people who are not necessarily animated by love and virtue like listening to classical music, you know. But I think the question is always, why are we listening to classical music, or why are we listening to anything or reading anything? And you have the difference between the active or passive experiencer who like just either consumes art or wants to be moved by art or literature or something they want to be moved by, but they're not actively taking in the soul of the composer of that music or of that poem or of that. Like Bach thought of his works as being prayers to God, right? That's how he thought of that's what animated the causality of his compositions was divine prayers to God. So if you get into an active state where you're trying to really get Bach's soul and motive alive again in your heart while you're listening to it, you could sort of like relive how he was feeling. So you realize that there's not another thing called Bach and then there's you, just like there's not another thing called Socrates, though there kind of is, and then there's you, but it's not this absolute wall. We're sort of like, we realize that in love and empathy with otherness, that we are also, we find a bit of that person inside of us too, that there's the sameness when we're actively thinking or experiencing, not just simply passively. So I think what you've just said, Harinder, applies to those who are still in that state where they've got the wall, the divide between themselves and the universe and themselves and others, and they just listen passively, and they'll never get what they seek, and they'll be pushed further and further away from what they
I would
seek.
argue, Matthew, that 99% of us are in that situation, and it is the rare soul, somebody like Socrates, who is able to cause that wall to collapse. But anyway, we shouldn't belabor this point. I think that is the situation about which it is described in the gospel also. Narrow is the gate and few be that find it. That theme resonates. It's in the Gita also. It is the rare soul that will cross the ocean of existence, etc., etc. So, but Socrates is encouraging, as do all the great prophets, as did Jesus, to reach that state where we are able to pierce that veil. I think Bruce has mentioned many times also, even in the last Sunday session, that we are all one. This is the teaching, but at the same time, we have been given these identities and vanities which make us separate. And what you were saying is that in certain experiences, like listening to Bach, we may enter a kind of temporary unanimity with Bach or with the soul of Bach, but then that fades once you stop that musical experience and you come back to your own physical separateness. And this is the challenge. We are in a world of duality, and we theoretically are told it's one universe and we are all one, but we always have the challenge of how do we fight our egos and fight our competitions, etc., to reach that level, that very rarefied level where we truly appreciate that we are all one. So this is the battle. This is the battle of what philosophy that Socrates and Jesus and all this, all the things.
I would like to offer a quick thought, if I may.
Yeah.
That it's a great matter of circumstances that some few souls should seek a greater attunement, if you will, or to find timelessness, or however you want to put it, and that many souls might not have that point of orientation because their circumstances are such that, because of hardship or bad luck or whatever, they know something about the unavoidable lesser attunement of the majority. As Harinder said, so many people are in that 99% passive mode. I think that maybe Simius might know something about the destruction of his soul or the lesser nature of his soul and doesn't want it to be chalked up that way. Tell me if I've missed the mark here.
No, I think I agree with what you said, Charlie.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it emphasizes the preciousness of what's being done here, and that when few souls seek to know or be something greater, that it's so rare and so, precious, especially when we have so many distractions like in our society.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's like everybody can't be a great artist like Bach or Beethoven or Michael Jordan. We're not
No
all
fault
gonna
on
be
them.
like that.
Good souls out there.
But we can definitely do something to increase the potential and the of that fire, right, to be kindled. Because if every soul is good, but is equally a soul and equally partakes in these eternals and these divine, processes, then the question for the teacher and for every person for every generation that will forever be is to always think, well, how do they better cultivate the best part of themselves that they can be, and help spread that, which is, I think, what Socrates and Plato really strove to do quite a bit, was increase, the oxygen going to the embers of the souls of those to come and those in their lifetime too, to start, becoming or discovering what they actually are.
A giant leap in creativity for all.
Yeah, that's nice. So let's we might not finish this, maybe we will, but let's continue on to the CB's I can't say his name, CB's argument, and see where he's going.
Can I ask one quick question, Ruth, before we continue? And it's just fast and funny. Did I pronounce a stringed musical instrument as Italian money?
You did, Bruce.
So it's a how do you pronounce the instrument?
Liar.
Which I'll try not to be in my reading interpretations.
A purveyor of falsehood, in fact.
What's that?
A liar. A purveyor of falsehood. I mean, as opposed to lira, money.
Yes, good one.
And I'm not suggesting for a second that the musical instrument has anything to do with untruth.
Socrates called himself likened himself to a shoe repairman, right? Because people said, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, I'm a repairer of bad souls."
Wow, nice.
Shakespeare did that in Julius Caesar too.
Yeah, right. Well, Shakespeare was a Platonist.
Okay, whose line is it?
I think it's let's recap there. This in that case, Socrates. Here, let's go with that one. And just
Action. In that case, it seems we have somehow placated the Theban goddess Harmonia quite well. But Cebus, what about Cadmus? How shall we placate him, and with what argument?
I think you will find a way. At least you presented this last argument, the one about attunement, wonderfully and contrary to what I expected. For while Simmias was describing his difficulty, I really wondered if anyone would be able to come to terms with his argument. So I thought it was remarkable when it failed to withstand the first attack of your argument. Now, I would not at all be surprised if the argument of Cadmus were to suffer the same fate.
Good man. Do not be boastful in case some malign influence overturns the impending argument. Anyway, God will take care of that while we, grappling like Homeric heroes, should try to find out if you are saying anything significant. And the essence of what you are looking for is this. You are asking to be shown that since our souls are indestructible and immortal, a man who loves wisdom and who is confident when he is about to die will not be demonstrating an irrational and foolish confidence by believing he is going to fare well when he gets there. Better than if he died after living a different sort of life. But as for showing that the soul is strong and divine and had a previous existence before we were born as human beings, you say that all these facts may just as easily indicate not immortality, but only that the soul is long lasting and has somehow existed for a considerable period of time and has known and done a great deal. But in fact, that did not make it any more immortal. Rather, this entry into a human body was the beginning of its demise, just like a disease. And the soul lives this life in suffering and finally perishes in what we call death. You also say that it makes no difference whether it enters a body once or many times, as far as the fear death holds for us is concerned. Indeed, unless he is stupid, it is appropriate for someone to be afraid when he does not know and is unable to uphold an argument that the soul is immortal. So, Cebus, I think these are the sort of issues you are raising, and I am deliberately going over them again and again in case anything escapes us, or there is anything you may wish to add or retract.
No, there is nothing I need to add or retract at the moment. And these are the issues I'm raising.
Socrates
Cebus.
paused for a long time, and he was considering something to himself.
Cebus, the question you are pursuing is not trivial, for it involves comprehensive deliberation about the cause of generation and destruction. I shall recount my own experiences of these topics if you wish. Then, if anything I say proves helpful to you with regard to the reassurance you are referring to, you may make use of it.
Well, I certainly want that.
And listen to what I'm going to say. When I was young, Cebus, I was extraordinarily eager for that wisdom, which they call the science of nature. To me, it seemed magnificent to know the causes of each thing, why each thing comes into being, why it perishes, and why it is. And I was constantly changing my direction back and forth, asking, firstly, do living creatures develop when hot and cold bring about some fermentation, as some people say? Is it the blood with which we think, or is it air or fire? Or is it actually none of these, but rather the brain which provides for the senses of hearing, seeing, and smelling, from which arise memory and opinion? And once memory and opinion have acquired stability, does knowledge arise on the basis of them? And then going on to consider their corruption and the things that happen in the heavens and on the earth. I finally deemed myself naturally unsuited to this sort of investigation, almost useless. I will give you enough evidence as follows. Before this, there were certain things I knew quite well, or so it seemed to me and to others, but later on, I was so utterly blinded by this investigation that I unlearned what I previously thought I knew about many other matters, and even about why a person grows. Before this, I thought it was obvious to everyone that this is due to eating and drinking. For from the food that is eaten, flesh is added to flesh, bone to bone, and through the same process, their own substance is also added to the other parts. And eventually, the lesser bulk becomes greater, and this is how the small person becomes big. This is what I thought at the time. Does that sound reasonable to you?
To me, yes.
Then consider this too. I used to regard it as acceptable for me to think that whenever a man standing beside a small man appears large, it is on account of the head itself that he is larger, and the same goes for horses. And it seemed even more evident to me that the 10 is greater than the 8 because the 2 is added to them, and the 2 cubits are greater than the 1 cubit because it exceeded it by half its length.
Yes, but what do you think about these matters now?
By Zeus, I am far from convinced that I know any of the causes of these things, when I cannot even accept for myself that whenever someone adds 1 to 1, either the 1 to which it is added has become 2, or that the added 1 and the 1 to which it is added became 2, due to the addition of the former to the latter. For I am amazed that when each of them was apart from the other, each was somehow 1, and neither then was 2, and yet once they drew near to one another, this was in itself somehow the cause of their becoming 2, this coming together in which they are placed near one another. Nor can I ever persuade myself that if someone divides me, this division is itself the cause of its becoming 2. For this cause of its becoming 2 turns out to be the opposite of the previous cause. Previously, it was because they were drawn together, close to one another, and were added to each other. But now it is because they are drawn apart and separated from each other. Neither can I ever persuade myself that I know how one arises, nor for that matter how anything else comes into being or perishes or is based upon this manner of approach. No, I do not accept this at all. And instead, I somehow devise an alternative manner of approach of my own. But one day, I heard someone reading from a book, which he said was by Anna,
Anaxagoras.
which he said was by Anaxagoras, which was saying that reason is what sets things in order and is the cause of everything. Now, I was pleased with this explanation, and it somehow seemed appropriate to me that reason is the cause of all. And I decided that if this is the case, then reason, as it is ordering everything, orders and arranges each thing in the best possible manner. Therefore, if someone should wish to discover the cause according to which each thing comes into being, perishes, or is, then he needs to discover the best way for that thing to be, or undergo, or enact anything at all. And so, based on this account, a person should consider nothing else about himself or about anything else except what is most excellent and best. And then the same person necessarily knows what is worse, for the knowledge concerned with both is the same. As I reflected on all this, I was delighted to think I had found a teacher of the cause of the things that are, whose reasoning was in accord with my own. I thought Anaxagoras would also tell me first whether the earth was flat or round. And when he had told me that, he would also explain the cause and necessity thereof, describing what is best and why it was better for the earth to be like that. And if he said it was in the center, he would go on to explain that it was better for it to be in the center. And if he could clarify these issues for me, I had resolved not to long for any other kind of cause. What is more, I had resolved to conduct an inquiry into the sun and the moon and the other stars in the same manner, their relative speed to one another, their inclinations and other characteristics, and the precise way in which it is better for each of them to behave as they do, and to undergo whatever happens to them. Indeed, once he stated that these things are ordered by reason, I never thought he would attribute any other cause to them, except that it is best for them to be in the state they are actually in. Therefore, I thought that in assigning the cause to each of the things and to all of them together, he would go on to explain what is best for each of them and good for all of them together. And I would not have traded these hopes for anything. No, I acquired the books eagerly and read them as quickly as I could, so that I would know the best and the worst as quickly as I could. Well, my friend, my wonderful hope was wrenched away from me when I continued with my reading and beheld a man neither having recourse to reason nor assigning to it any responsibility for the ordering of things, but assigning responsibility to air and ether and water and numerous other oddities. And he seemed to me to be behaving just like someone who says that anything Socrates does is done on account of reason. But then, when he tries to state the causes of each action I perform, he might say, firstly, that the explanation for my sitting in this place now is that my body is constituted from bones and sinews, and the bones are hard and have joints separating them from one another, while the sinews, which can be tensed and relaxed, surround the bones, as does the flesh and the skin which encloses them. Well, since the bones are dangling in their own sockets, the tightening and loosening of the sinews now enables me somehow to bend my limbs. And this is the cause of my sitting here with my legs bent. And likewise, with regard to our conversation, he might also propose other causes of this sort, describing sounds, air currents, auditory experience, and countless other factors as causes, neglecting to mention the true causes that once the Athenians had decided it was better to condemn me, I in turn decided it was indeed better for me to sit here, because it was more just to remain and submit to whatever penalty they might dictate. Since by the dog, I am sure these bones and sinews would have been in Megara or Boeotia long ago, impelled by an opinion about what was best, if I had not thought it more just and noble to submit to whatever penalty the city might impose, rather than taking flight and running away. But to prefer to such factors as causes is most absurd. And yet, if anyone were to say that without having such things as bones and sinews and anything else I possess, I would be unable to do whatever I decide to do, he would be speaking the truth. To say, however, that I do what I do because of these, and that I also perform them on account of reason, and not on account of choosing what is best, would show a very great disregard for the argument. Imagine being unable to make the distinction between the actual cause on the one hand, and that in the absence of which the cause would never be a cause on the other hand. Yes, it seems to me that most people are groping about in the dark and making use of an inappropriate name when they refer to this as a cause. And on this basis, some place a vortex about the earth and make the earth remain in place on account of the heavens, while others support the earth just like a flat dish resting upon air. But the power by which these are now situated in the best way that they could have been placed is a power which they neither look for nor credit with any divine strength. Instead, they believe they will eventually discover some Atlas who is stronger and more immortal than this, who will do a better job of encompassing them all. And it never occurs to them that in truth, the good and the right bind and encompass. Now, I would gladly have become the pupil of anyone at all in order to learn the precise nature of such a cause as this. However, since this was denied me and I proved unable either to find it myself or learn from someone else, would you like me, Cebus, to give an exposition of how I undertook the second sailing in search of the cause?
Yes, I would like that very much.
Well, after this, since I was exhausted from studying the things that are, it seemed to me that I should beware lest I suffer the fate of those who look at the sun and study it during an eclipse. For some of them, as you know, destroy their eyes unless they study its image in water or something of that sort. I also arrived at a similar understanding, and I was afraid that my soul might be totally blinded by looking at things with the eyes and trying to grasp them with each of the senses. So it seemed to me that I should take refuge in arguments and study in these the truth of the things that are. Now, perhaps my comparison is in a sense inappropriate, for I do not really agree that someone who studies the things that are through arguments has more recourse to images than someone who studies them in actualities. Anyway, I set about this in the following manner. In each case, I hypothesize an account which I judge to be the strongest, and I regard it as true, and I regard as true anything which seems to me to be in harmony with this, whether it concerns a cause or anything else at all. And I regard anything which does not as untrue. But I would like to explain what I am saying to you more clearly, for I do not think you understand at the moment.
No, by Zeus, not completely.
Well, this is what I mean. It is nothing new. Now, it is just what I have been constantly repeating, both in the argument, which has just been presented, and on other occasions. Indeed, I'm going to attempt to show you the kind of cause I have worked on, and I'm going back again to topics which have been discussed repeatedly, and I'm starting from those, proposing that there is beauty just by itself, and good, and largeness, and all the others. And if you grant me these and agree that they exist, I hope from these to show you the cause and to confirm that the soul is immortal.
Well, in that case, you may assume that I grant you this, and you should lose no time in proceeding with the account.
Then consider the consequences of these admissions, and whether they seem to you as they do to me. For it appears to me that if anything else is beautiful except beauty itself, then it is beautiful because it partakes of that beauty and for no other reason. And I say the same about all the others. Do you accept this sort of cause?
I accept.
Well, then, I no longer understand, nor am I able to recognize the otherwise causes. But if someone says to me that anything at all is beautiful because of the bright color it has, or its shape, or anything else of that sort, I dismiss the others, for I am confused by them all. And I myself maintain simply, plainly, and perhaps foolishly, that nothing else makes it beautiful except the presence of that beauty or communion with it, regardless of the manner or means by which these occur. For I am not making a definite assertion about this yet, but I do assert that all beautiful things are beautiful on account of beauty. And this seems to me the safest answer to give to myself or anyone else. And once I hold to this, I believe I shall never fall. Rather, it is safe for me or anyone at all to answer that beautiful things become beautiful on account of beauty. Or does it not seem that way to you?
That is how it seems.
And so are large things large and larger things larger on account of largeness, and smaller things smaller on account of smallness?
Yes.
Then you would not accept it if someone were to say that one person is larger than another on account of a head, and the smaller person is smaller on account of the same thing. Instead, you would affirm that you are only saying that everything which is larger than another is larger on account of nothing except largeness, and is larger because of this, because of largeness. And the smaller is smaller on account of nothing else but smallness, and is smaller because of this, because of smallness. I think you would be afraid in case some counter argument might oppose you if you were to state that someone is larger or smaller on account of a head. Firstly, because you say the larger is larger and the smaller is smaller on account of the same thing. And secondly, because you say the larger is larger on account of the head, which is small. And of course, it is preposterous that anyone is large on account of something small. Would you not be afraid of these responses? I'm asking you a question, Stevens. You muted yourself, I think. We time traveled into the 21st century.
No, I have a little bit of a cough, so I wouldn't.
I know.
Yes.
This is making you very emotional, I know. Would you not be afraid to state that 10 is more than 8 on account of 2 and exceeds it because of this cause, rather than on account of quantity and because of quantity? And that the 2 cubits are greater than the 1 cubit on account of half and not on account of largeness? Yes, I presume you would have the same fear.
Very much so.
What about this? Would you not beware of saying that if 1 is added to 1, the cause of their becoming 2 is the addition? Or in the case where it is divided, the division? Instead, you would shout loudly that you know no other way that each arises except by participating in the being particular to each of those in which it participates. And in the examples we were discussing, you know no other cause of becoming 2 except by participation in duality. And whatever it is to be 2 must participate in this, and whatever it is to be 1 must participate in unity. But those divisions and additions and other subtleties of that kind you would set aside, leaving it to those who are wiser than you are to give those answers. Instead, you would be afraid, as they say, of your own shadow and your own inexperience, and would adhere to that safe hypothesis and would answer based upon that. Yet, if someone were to adhere to the hypothesis itself, you would ignore him and would not respond until you had considered whether the consequences of that were, in your view, concordant or discordant with one another. And when you had to give an account of the hypothesis itself, you would do so in the same way, by proposing another further hypothesis, which seems best of those which are higher, until you arrive at something adequate. but you would not confuse matters, as the disputatious people do, by discussing the principle and the consequences of it at the same time, if you really wanted to discover any of the things that are. Indeed, these fellows do not have a single scruple or concern about this, for they are enabled by their wisdom to jumble everything together, and yet they are still able to be content with themselves. But you, if you really are among the lovers of wisdom, will, I believe, do as I suggest.
What you are saying is completely true.
Who wants to be a Kecrates?
I'll
I can be-
volunteer for that.
Uh,
Yeah,
two-
go for it,
I-
Peter.
Declan got in just before you, Paul.
Sure. I'm happy to have a rest today, mate.
No, you can be Phaedo.
Oh, okay.
All right. By Zeus, Phaedo. Of course, Simmias and Cebes did. Indeed, I think he has explained this with extraordinary clarity to anyone with even a little intelligence.
Yes, certainly, Echecrates, and everyone who was present thought so too.
Yes, and so do those who were absent but are listening to you now. Well, what else was said after all this?
As I recall, when these points had been conceded to him and it was agreed that each of the forms is something and the other things have acquired the names of the forms themselves by partaking of them, he proceeded to ask the following. Now, he said, if you describe matters in this way and you say that Simmias is larger than Socrates and smaller than Phaedo, are you not then saying that both largeness and smallness are in Simmias?
Who's this?
I think that's Harinder.
Is
Who's on mute?
I think it's the Echecrates. Declan.
No, I'm pretty sure it's no. We're back to the story. We
Okay.
just jumped momentarily into the future, and now we're
Oh,
back
okay.
into, into the story.
Yeah, that's why the names aren't there at the beginning of the sentences. Okay.
I can say indeed if you want to.
So then Socrates is more to the point?
Oh yeah.
Yep.
More to the point, are you agreeing with the statement, Simmias is taller than Socrates, when the words used do not actually express the truth? For presumably Simmias is not by nature taller than I am on account of being Simmias, but on account of the largeness he happens to possess. Nor again is he taller than Socrates because Socrates is Socrates, but because Socrates has smallness relative to Simmias's largeness.
True.
Nor again is he less tall than Phaedo because Phaedo is Phaedo, but rather because Phaedo has largeness relative to Simmias's smallness.
That is it.
So in this way, Simmias is referred to as being both large and small, as he is between both of them, allowing the smallness to be exceeded by the greatness of one person and presenting to the other the greatness that exceeds that man's smallness. I seem to be speaking like a legal document, but anyway, the situation is certainly as I am describing it. Now, thank you. Now, I am saying this for the following reason. I want you to hold the same opinion as I do, for it appears to me not only that the large itself never consents to being large and small at the same time, but also that the large in us never admits the small, nor consents to being exceeded. Instead, there are two possible outcomes. Either it departs and withdraws whenever it's possible, the small approaches, or else it perishes once the small arrives. But it never consents to being different from the very thing that it is by waiting about and admitting smallness. Just as I, having admitted and endured smallness and still being just what I am, I, the same person, am small, but that large has never ventured to be small, and in like manner, the small that is in us never consents to become large or to be so, nor do any of the other opposites, while still being just what they are, also become and be opposite. No, in that circumstance, they either depart or perish.
Entirely so. That is how it appears to me. Matthew.
Oh, sorry. Actually, that's Phaedo.
And-
Paul.
Okay. And having heard this, one of the company, I do not remember exactly who it was, said, By the gods, in our earlier discussion, did we not agree the very opposite of what we are now saying? Did we not say that the greater arises from the lesser and the lesser from the greater? And in short, the actual generation of opposites is from opposites. But now I think we are saying that this would never happen.
Having turned his head
No,
and
no, that's
listening,
still Paul.
Oh, okay. Having turned his head and listening, Socrates said, you have
All right,
been
Bruce,
very
Bruce,
brave
Bruce.
to
No,
remind
no,
us.
no. You just gave it to Bruce.
Pike,
Yeah, that's what I thought.
you
of
have been
Socrates.
very, thank you. You have been very brave to remind us. However, you are not recognizing the difference between what we are saying now and what we said then. For we were saying then that the opposite thing arises from the opposite thing. Now, however, we are saying that the opposite itself, be it in us or in nature, would not ever become opposite to itself. For then, my friend, we were talking about whatever possessed the opposites, referring to them by the name of the appropriate opposites. Now, however, we are discussing the opposites themselves, whose name the objects bear because those opposites are within them. And we are saying that the opposites themselves would never be prepared to undergo conversion into one another.
Right. So again, always keep in mind the being, the realm, the higher realm of reality of the being, and the lower realm of the becoming that coexist, but they're not, you can't take the same metrics of one and put them into the other, right? The realm of the finite, where things are composites, changing always, bounded in space and time. That realm is not the same thing that he's necessarily talking about here, where things are as they are and not their opposite, right?
What about you, Sebas? I presume you were not bothered by any aspect of what our friend here said.
No, that's not how I feel just now, though I'm not denying that there are numerous issues bothering me.
So we have agreed without reservation that the opposite will never be opposite to itself.
Entirely so.
Then consider whether you also agree with me about the following. Do you call something hot or cold?
I do.
And are they identical with fire and snow?
By Zeus, I do not think so.
Rather, the hot is something different from fire, and the cold something different from snow.
Yes.
Then, I presume you appreciate that, as we said earlier, being snow, it will not ever admit heat and still be just what it is, snow, and also hot. Instead, at the approach of heat, it either withdraws from it or perishes.
Certainly.
And fire also either slips away or perishes when cold approaches. But it will never venture to admit the coldness and still be just what it was, fire and also cold.
What you are saying is true.
Then, in some cases like this, the position is that the form itself is not the only thing that always merits the same name forever, but there is also something else, which is not that form, but always possesses a feature of that form whenever it exists. But perhaps what I mean will be even clearer with this example, for presumably the odd must always be assigned this name which we are now using. Is this not so?
Certainly.
But is this the only thing that is assigned this name? That is my question. Or is there something else which is not identical with the odd, but which nevertheless must always be referred to by this name along with its own name, because by nature it is never devoid of the odd? I'm referring, for instance, to how the number 3 and many others are characterized. Think about the number 3. Does it not seem that you must always refer to it by its own name and by the name of the odd, although the odd is not identical with the number 3, but nevertheless 3, 5.5, and all number, although they are not identical with the odd, each of them is always odd? And furthermore, 2, 4, and all the other series of numbers that are nevertheless always even in each case, though they're not identical with the even? Do you agree or not?
How could I disagree?
Then take note of what I'm trying to show you. It is as follows. It is evident not only that those opposites do not admit one another, but also that whatever things are not opposite to one another, but always contain opposites, seem not to admit that form which is opposite to the form they contain. Rather, when it approaches, they either perish or withdraw. Or shall we deny that the number 3 would prefer to perish or suffer any other fate rather than wait about still being 3 and become even?
It certainly will.
And yet 2 is not the opposite of 3.
Definitely not.
So it is not only the opposite forms that do not wait about as they approach one another, but some other things also do not wait about as the opposites approach.
What you're saying is very true.
Now, would you like us, if we are able, to define what sort these are?
Very much so.
Well, Sebas, would they be those which always compel whatever they take hold of to adopt not only their own form, but also the form of some additional opposite?
What do you mean?
Just what we were saying a moment ago. For you know, of course, that whatever the form of 3 takes hold of, it must not only be 3, but also odd.
Certainly.
Then we are saying that the opposite form to the form that produces this would never come to something of this sort.
It would not.
Now, does oddness produce this property?
Yes.
And is the form of the even the opposite of this?
Yes.
So the form of the even will never come to the number 3.
Certainly not.
Then the number 3 has no share in the even.
No share.
So the number 3 is uneven.
Yes.
Well, I said we were to define the sort of things which, although not opposite to something, nevertheless do not admit it the opposite. For example, the number 3, although it is not opposite to the even, does not admit the even to any extent. For 3 always imposes the opposite of the even, and 2 imposes the opposite of the odd, fire, the opposite of cold, and there is a whole range of other instances. Now decide whether they are defined in this way. Not only does an opposite not admit an opposite, but there is also that which imposes some opposite upon whatever it approaches, and that imposer itself will never admit the opposite of that which it imposes. But let me remind you again, it is not a bad idea to hear this very often. The number 5 will not admit the even, nor will its double, 10, admit the odd. Now, double itself is also the opposite of something, but nevertheless, it will not admit the form of the odd, nor will 1 1/2 and other such numbers, like the half and the third and all the numbers of that sort, admit the form of the whole. Do you follow and do you agree that this is the case?
Yes, I agree most emphatically, and I am following.
Then recount this to me once more from the beginning, and do not answer on the basis of my question, but by imitating what I am doing. I am saying that beyond the first answer I gave, the safe one, I see another safe answer emerging from the present discussion. For if you were to ask me, by the presence of what will the body be hot, I shall not give you the safe answer, the stupid one, that it is by the presence of heat, but a more subtle answer based on this discussion, that it is by the presence of fire. And if you should ask, by the presence of what will the body be ill, I shall not reply that it is by the presence of illness, but by the presence of fever. Nor would I say that a number is made odd by the presence of oddness, but by the presence of a unit, and so on for the other instances. But let us check at this stage whether you understand adequately what I mean.
Playing the role of Cebus is, I say very adequately, but personally, I did very adequately.
Then answer this question now that you've returned to character. By the presence of what will the body be alive?
By the presence of soul.
Is this not always the case?
How could it be otherwise?
Then soul, whatever it takes hold of, always arrives bringing life to it.
Yes, that is how it arrives.
That's nice. That's mighty nice. Okay. And is there or is there not something opposite to life?
Yes, there is
What?
death.
Now, based on what we agreed earlier, is it not the case that soul will never admit the opposite of that which it imposes?
It certainly will not.
Well, then, what did we call that which does not admit the form of the even a moment ago?
Uneven.
And that which does not admit the just, and that which does not admit the musical?
Unmusical and unjust.
So be it. And what shall we call that which does not admit death?
Immortal.
Now, soul does not admit death, does it?
No.
Then soul is immortal.
Immortal.
So be it. Now, may we say that this has been proved? How does it seem to you?
Yes, very adequately, Socrates.
What about this, Cebus? If it were also necessary for the uneven to be imperishable, could the number 3 be anything other than imperishable?
No, how could it be?
And if it were also necessary for the unhot to be imperishable, whenever someone brought heat to bear upon snow, would not the snow withdraw intact and unmelted? For it could not be destroyed, nor again could it wait about and admit the hotness?
What you're saying is true.
And in the very same way, I presume, if the uncoolable was indestructible, then whenever something cool approached fire, fire could never be extinguished, nor could it perish, but would depart intact and go away.
It must.
And must we not also say the same thing about the immortal? If the immortal is also imperishable, it is impossible for soul to perish whenever death approaches her. For as we said earlier, it will not admit death, nor will it be dead. Just as we said the number 3 will not be even, nor for that matter will the odd be even, nor will fire be cold, and neither will the heat within the fire. But someone might say the odd does not become even at the approach of the even. We have agreed this. But why could it not perish and the even arise in place of the odd? To someone who says this, we would not be able to contend that it does not perish, for the uneven is not imperishable. Indeed, if this point were conceded to us, we could easily have contended that once the even approaches, the odd and the number 3 depart and are gone. And we could offer a similar contention about fire and heat and the other instances. Is this not so?
Yes, certainly.
And therefore, in the present discussion about the immortal, if it were conceded to us that it is also imperishable, then soul too would be imperishable, as well as being immortal. But otherwise, some other argument would be required.
No
But no other.
argument,
That your line?
but no argument is required for this purpose. For if the immortal being everlasting is going to admit destruction, nothing else could avoid admitting destruction at all.
Yes. And I think it would be agreed by everyone that God and the form of life itself and anything else that is immortal will never perish.
Yes, by Zeus, by every human being, and in my opinion, even more so by the gods.
Now, since the immortal is also indestructible, wouldn't the soul, if it happens to be immortal, be imperishable too?
It simply must be.
So when death comes to a person, it seems that the mortal part dies while the immortal departs and goes on its way intact and indestructible, giving way to death.
So it appears.
So we have all the more reason to accept, Cebus, that soul is immortal and imperishable. And in truth, our souls will exist in Hades.
Well, Socrates, I do not have anything else to say against these arguments, nor do I doubt them in any respect. But of course, if Simmias or anyone else here has anything to say, he had better not remain silent. Because if someone wants to say or hear anything about such matters, I do not know of any other occasion to which he can postpone the present opportunity.
And yet, I too have no further grounds for doubt on the basis of what is being said. However, on account of the vast subject that the arguments are dealing with, and being wary of human weakness, I am bound to harbor additional doubts within myself in relation to what has been said.
Not only are you right to say that, Simmias, but you should examine the initial hypothesis in greater clarity in any case, even if you believe them yourselves. And if you analyze them properly, I think you will follow the argument to the greatest extent that anyone can follow it. And once this has become clear, you will seek nothing further.
What you are saying is true.
But my friends, it is right to bear in mind that if in fact the soul is immortal, it requires care. Not only for the sake of the interval of time which we call life, but for the sake of all time. And indeed, if anyone should neglect the soul, the danger now seems to be terrible. For if death were an escape from everything, it would be a godsend for the wicked to die and be freed from the body and their own wickedness along with the soul. Now, however, since the soul turns out to be immortal, there would be no escape from the evils or any salvation for it, apart from becoming as good and wise as possible. For the soul goes to Hades, possessing nothing else except its education and its nurture, which are indeed said to afford the greatest benefit or harm to the person who has died at the very outset of the journey to that place. And accordingly, it is said that when each person dies, the daimon of that person, which has been assigned through life, is responsible to lead them to some place where those who are gathered have undergone judgment, must journey to Hades along with that guide who has been given the task of conducting people from this place to that place. But once they are there and met what they needed to meet and have remained for as long as necessary, another guide brings them back here again over numerous lengthy cycles of time. So the journey is not as Aeschylus Telephos. Is that the right pronunciation of that beautiful name?
Aeschylus is Telephos.
As the journey is not as Aeschylus Telephos describes it, so the journey is not as he describes it. For he says that a simple path leads to Hades. But to me, it appears to be neither simple nor single. If it were simple, no guide would be required, for presumably one could go wrong anywhere if there were only one. No one could go wrong anywhere if there were only one path. But it now seems that it has many forks and crossroads, and I think this is evident from the sacrifices and rituals which are offered in this world. Now, the orderly and wise soul follows the guide and is not unaware of its surroundings, while the soul, which is possessed of desires of the body, as we said before, flutters about the body and about the visible region for a long time. After much resistance and a lot of affliction, the soul is led away forcibly and reluctantly by its appointed daimon, and it departs. Now the soul, which is unpurified and has acted in that sort of manner, having engaged in unjust killings or other activities of the kind which are akin to these, and are the deeds of kindred souls, does arrive where the others are. But everyone shuns the soul and turns away from it, and has no desire to become its traveling companion or its guide. Instead, the soul wanders in utter perplexity until certain periods of time have elapsed. And when these are over, it is borne by necessity to the abode appropriate to it. But each soul that has spent a life in purity and measure encounters gods as its traveling companions and guides, and inhabits the region appropriate to it. Now, someone has convinced me that the regions of the earth are many and wondrous, and it has neither the qualities nor the extent presumed by those who usually describe it.
What do you mean, Socrates? Of course, I have heard a great deal about the earth myself, but not these descriptions which have convinced you. So I would love to hear them.
Well, Simmias, I do not think the skill of Glaucus is needed to describe in detail what they are. However, it appears to me that it is beyond even the skill of Glaucus to show that they are true. And what is more, perhaps I might be unable to do it. And even if I had the knowledge, I do not think my own life is now long enough for such a lengthy discourse. Yet there is nothing to stop me from describing the form which I am convinced the earth has and the regions it possesses.
But even that much is sufficient.
Well, I am convinced, firstly, that if the earth is in the center of the universe and is round, it does not need anything to prevent it from falling, either air or any other constraint of that sort. Rather, the homogeneity of the universe itself with itself in every direction and the even balance of the earth itself are sufficient to hold it. For an evenly balanced object placed in the center of something homogeneous will not be able to turn more in one direction than in another. Instead, being in a situation of homogeneity, it remains motionless. So that is the first thing I am convinced of.
And rightly so.
Now, the next point is that it is absolutely enormous. And we who dwell between the pillars of Hercules and the river Phasis inhabit a tiny part of it, living around the sea like ants or frogs around a pool, while many others dwell elsewhere in lots of other regions of this sort. For there are numerous hollows all over the earth of various forms and sizes, into which water, mist, and air have gathered together. But the earth itself is pure, and it rests in the pure region of the universe where the stars are situated, the region which most people who usually discuss such matters call the ether. In fact, water, mist, and air are the sediments of ether, and they constantly flow together into the hollows of the earth. But we are unaware that we are living in its hollows and think we inhabit the upper surface of the earth. It is as if someone living down in the depths of the ocean were to think he was living on the sea, and beholding the sun and the other stars through the water, believed that the sea was the sky. Due to his lethargy and weakness, he would never get to the sea surface, nor would he behold how much purer and more beautiful is this region than that of his fellows by coming to the top of the water and popping out his head. Nor would he hear about this from someone else who had seen it. Well, our predicament is the same as his. For we inhabit some hollow of the earth and believe that we are dwelling on its surface. And we refer to the air as the heaven because the stars move through this as if it were a heaven. But in fact, due to our weakness in lethargy, we are unable to make our way to the furthest extremity of air. Yet if someone were to get to its upper limit or became winged and flew there, he could stick his head up and have a look. And just as fishes who stick their heads out of the sea can behold whatever is in this region, he would likewise view whatever is in that region. And if his nature were up to the task of sustaining the observation, he would realize that this is the true heaven, the true light, and the true earth. For this earth here, and the stones, and the entire region we are in, are corrupted and eroded, just as objects in the sea are affected by the brine. And nothing worthy of note grows in the sea, and almost nothing is perfect there. Rather, there are caverns and sand and huge amounts of mud and mire wherever there is any earth. Nothing at all is worthy of comparison with the beauties of our region. And those beauties would, in turn, prove to be superior to the beauties of our realm to an even greater extent. And now, if it is appropriate to tell a story, it is worth hearing, Simmias, what the things upon the earth, that is beneath the heaven, happen to be like.
In that case, Socrates, we would be glad to hear this story.
Well, then, my friend, it is said, firstly, that if anyone views the earth itself from above, it looks just like those balls made from 12 pieces of leather, painted with distinct colors, of which the colors in our region are just like the samples used by the painters. But in that place, the earth is entirely composed of such colors, and of colors that are much brighter and purer than those. For one part is purple, and its beauty is wondrous. Another is golden, and anything white is whiter than chalk or snow. And the earth is composed of other colors in the same way, colors even more numerous and more beautiful than all we have seen. What is more, those hollows themselves, being filled with water and air, exhibit a kind of color glistening amidst the variety of other colors, so that the earth appears as one continuous, variegated surface. But since that is what this earth is like, whatever grows there grows in conformity with this principle, be they plants, flowers, or fruits. And what is more, in like manner, mountains and stones, in conformity with the same principle, have smoothness and transparency and more beautiful colors. And the pebbles which are prized among us, sards, jaspers, emeralds, and all the like, are fragments of those. But in that place, there are no stones that are not like those, and even more beautiful than those. And the reason for this is that the stones there are pure and have not been corroded and corrupted like ours by filth and brine due to everything that flows into this place, influxes which bring deformity to stones, earth, and the like, and diseases to plants and animals. But that earth itself has been adorned with all these beauties, and also with gold and silver and other materials of that sort. For these are naturally in evidence as they are plentiful, large, and they are everywhere upon the earth. Consequently, to behold that earth is a vision which is a blessing to those who look upon it. And there are many other creatures there, and humans too, some dwelling inland, others living close to the air, just as we live close to the sea, some on islands surrounded by air and close to the mainland. And in short, as we have recourse to water and the sea, so do they have recourse to air. And as we have recourse to air, so do they have recourse to the ether. Their seasons are so temperate that the people are free from disease, and their span of life is much longer than it is here. And in sight and hearing and wisdom and in everything of that sort, they exceed us to the same extent that air exceeds water and ether exceeds air in respect of purity. And in fact, they have sacred groves and temples in which the gods really do reside, and utterances, prophecies, awareness of the gods, and any communion of that sort is conducted by them directly with the gods themselves. And the sun, moon, and stars are seen by them just as they actually are, and their general blessedness is a consequence of these blessings. Now, Although the entire earth and the details thereof are thus by nature, there are in fact many regions within it corresponding to the hollows it has all around its entire surface. Some are deeper and wider than the place in which we are dwelling. Others are deeper, but they have a lesser expanse than our region. And there are others too, which are shallower in depth and broader than ours. These are all interconnected beneath the earth in various ways, by channels, some narrow, some wider, and these have outlets from which lots of water pours from one region into the other, as if it were flowing into mixing bowls. And these are enormously large, ever-flowing rivers of both hot and cold water beneath the earth. And there is a great deal of fire and huge rivers of fire and of molten earth, some of which are even more filthy, like the rivers of mud which flow in front of the lava in Sicily, while others are purer, like the lava itself. And in fact, each of these regions is filled by these as the circular flow happens to arrive at each in turn. These all move upwards and downwards, just like a kind of seesaw present within the earth. The nature of the oscillation itself is something like this one. One of the chasms in the earth happens to be particularly large, and it is bored right through the entire earth. This is the one Homer refers to when he says, far off in the lowest depths beneath the earth, and elsewhere he and many other poets have named it Tartarus. For all of the rivers flow into this chasm and flow out again from this, and each becomes like the kind of earth through which they flow. But the reason why all the streams flow in and flow out of there is that this liquid has no bottom or base. So it oscillates and surges up and down, and the air and the wind associated with it do the same. For they follow the liquid whenever it gushes to the remote parts of the earth or to these parts. And just as those who are breathing continually inhale and exhale the flowing breath, so also does the wind there oscillate along with the liquid, giving rise to terrible and enormous gales as it goes in and goes out. Now, whenever the water withdraws to the region which we call lower, it flows through the earth into the channels that are there and fills them as if it were being pumped. And whenever it leaves there again and surges back here, the streams here are filled once more. And once they have been filled, they flow through the channels and through the earth. And when each arrives at the region to which it has been given passage, it makes seas, lakes, rivers, and springs. And from there, they dive beneath the earth. And when some have gone around the more numerous, larger regions, and others have gone around the less numerous, smaller regions, they discharge once more into Tartarus. Some far below, others a little below where they were pumped out, but they all flow in below where they were flowed out. Although some flow in directly opposite to the point where they left, others below the same point. There are some that go around in a complete circle, coiling around the earth either once or even many times, like snakes, and having descended as low as possible, they discharge once more. It is possible to descend in either direction as far as the center, but no further, because to both streams, the part on either side is uphill. Now, these streams are numerous, large and variegated, but among this multiplicity are four in particular, and the largest and outermost of these, flowing around in a circle, is called Oceanus. Directly opposite to this, flowing in the opposite direction, is Acheron, which flows through various desert places, but more significantly, it flows under the earth, reaching the Arcesian Lake, where most souls of the dead arrive and abide for an allotted time, longer in some cases, but shorter in others, and are sent back once more to be born as living creatures. The third river issues forth midway between these two, and close to its point of exit, it emerges into a vast region burning with a lot of fire, and it makes a lake of boiling water and mud larger than the sea in our region. It proceeds in a circle from there, foul and muddy, winding about through the earth in various places, and arrives at the shores of the Arcesian Lake without commingling with its waters. After many windings under the earth, it discharges beneath Tartarus. This is the river they refer to as Periphlegygathon, and from this, the lava streams shoot forth their branches from the earth in a random manner. Directly opposite to this river, the fourth river issues forth, initially into a terrible and wild region, which is said to be entirely colored like lapis lazuli and is referred to as the Stygian region. And the lake made by the discharging river is the Styx. Now, once it is poured in there and has acquired formidable powers in the water, it dives beneath the earth and proceeds to circle about in the opposite direction to the Paraphlegegathon and meets it in the Arcarusian lake coming from the opposite side. Neither does it mingle with the waters of the lake. Rather, this river goes around in a circle and discharges into the Tartarus, opposite Paraphlegegathon. And the name of this, according to the poets, is
You're on a roll, Bruce. You're on a roll.
Tacitus.
Tacitus.
This is the nature of
You're
these
hitting it out of the
regions.
park.
Once those who have died arrive in the region to which the daimon guides each one, they first submit to judgment, some having lived in a noble and sacred manner, others not. Now, those who were judged to have lived middling lives proceed to the Acheron, get on board vessels which are somehow provided for them, and arrive at the lake on these. There they dwell. And if anyone has done any injustice, he is purified of the injustices, makes retribution, and is freed from them. And they receive the rewards of their good deeds, each according to their deserts. But those who are judged incurable because of the magnitude of their transgressions, having carried out numerous and grave sacrilegious acts, or many unjust killings contrary to law, or any other deeds of that sort, these people, the appropriate fate, casts into Tartarus, never to emerge again. But those who were judged curable, though they committed great transgressions, such as doing some violence or anger to a father or mother, and living the rest of their lives in repentance, or being involved in homicides under similar circumstances, these people necessarily fall into Tartarus. Once they have fallen in and spent a year there, the surge sends forth the homicides along with Cactus and those who have assaulted father or mother along the Paraphlegegathon. They are carried along, and whenever they get to the Acherusian lake, they shout and cry out in that place to the people who have slain, to the people they have slain and the people they have assaulted. With their cries, they plead and beg that they be allowed to come out into the lake and to be accepted. And if they persuade these people, out they come, and that is the end of their afflictions. But if they do not persuade them, they are carried again into Tartarus, and from there they enter the rivers once more, and this happens to them unceasingly until they persuade the people they have wronged. For this particular penalty has been imposed upon them by the judges. But the people who were judged to have lived with exceptional holiness are the ones who are set free from those places beneath the earth, as though they are being released from prisons. They arrive above in the pure abode, and they dwell upon the earth. Of these people, the ones who have purified themselves sufficiently through philosophy live thereafter without bodies for all time, and they arrive at dwellings even more beautiful than those, which are not easy to describe, nor is there enough time just now. But as a consequence of everything we have been discussing, Simius, we must make all efforts to partake of virtue and wisdom in this life, for the reward is beautiful and the hope is great. Now, it would not be appropriate for a man of intelligence to insist that matters are as I have recounted them, but that these considerations, or something like them, are applicable to our souls and their dwelling places, in view of the fact that the soul turns out to be immortal, seems to me a hazard worth taking, for the hazard is beautiful and appropriate to someone who holds this view of the soul, and he should chant to himself as though they were charms. And that is why I have been lengthening the story just now. So these are the reasons why a man should be confident about his own soul once he has bid farewell in this life to the various pleasures and adornments associated with the body, because they are alien, and realizing they are more inclined to have the opposite effect, has busied himself with learning and adorned the soul, not with an alien adornment, but with its own, with sound-mindedness, justice, courage, freedom, and truth. And in this condition, he awaits the journey to Hades, ready to make that journey whenever destiny may call. Well, Simmias and Cebus, you and the others will each in turn make the journey at some stage, but now, as someone in a tragedy might say, destiny is already calling me, and it is almost time for me to make my way to the bath. Indeed, I think it'd best to drink the poison after bathing and not give it to the women. Give to the women the task of washing a corpse.
Paul?
Oh, okay. I became Crito all of a sudden,
No,
did I?
you became no, I just need you for 5 words.
Okay, so be it, Socrates, but what directions do you have for these men? Or
No,
for
no,
me
no.
cons-
It's just, well, I just meant for you to say, well, once he had said all this, Crito said, and then Crito,
Okay, well, once he
matter.
had said all this, Crito said,
Vince? Oh no, Crito, I'll just be Crito. So be it, Socrates. But what directions do you have for these men or for me concerning either your children or anything else? What is the greatest service we could perform for you?
I shall say what I always say, Crito. Nothing new, that in caring for yourselves, you will be doing a service to me and mine and to yourselves, whatever actions you may perform, even if you make no promises now. But if you do not care for yourselves and are not prepared to live your life based upon the path which accords with the declarations we have made now and on previous occasions, even if you make a lot of fervent promises now, nothing more will come of it.
In that case, we shall strive earnestly to do as you ask. But in what way should we bury you?
Any way you like. That is, if you can catch me and I do not escape you. Friends, I cannot persuade Crito that I am this Socrates who is conversing with you right now and arranging each topic of discussion. Instead, he thinks I am the one he will see in a short time as a corpse, and he asks how he should bury me. I presented extensive arguments a while ago that once I drink the poison, I shall no longer remain with you, but shall depart and be gone to some delights of the blessed. But I think these have been spoken to him in vain, while consoling both yourselves and myself at the same time. Therefore, give an assurance about me to Crito, the opposite assurance to the one he gave the jurors. For he assured them I would remain, but he assured them that I would remain, but you must assure him that I shall not remain after I die, but will depart and be gone, so that Crito may bear this more easily. And when he sees my body being burned or buried, he may not be troubled on my account as though I am being treated dreadfully, or say at the funeral that Socrates lies before us or is borne to the grave or buried. For mark my words well, excellent Crito, speaking improperly is not only wrong in itself, but it also engenders an evil in our souls. Instead, you must take heart and say you are burying my body, and bury it as you please and as you deem appropriate.
is it me next, Matthew?
Yep.
Having said this, he got up and went to another room in order to bathe. Crito followed him, but he told us to wait. So we waited, conversing amongst ourselves about what had been said and considering it once more. And then we went on to recount the extent of the misfortune which had befallen us, literally believing that we had been deprived of a father and would spend the rest of our lives as orphans. Once he had bathed, the children were brought to him, for he had 2 small sons and a big one, and the women of his household arrived, and he conversed with them in Crito's presence and gave the instructions he wished to give. He then asked the women and children to depart, and he himself returned to us. Now at that stage, the sun was almost setting, for he had spent a lot of time within. When he came back after bathing, he sat down, but not much was discussed after that. And the servant of the 11 arrived, stood before him and said, Socrates, I shall not find in you the fault I find in others, whereby they are angry with me and curse me when, on the instructions of the archons, I order them to drink the poison. During your time here, I have known you as the noblest, gentlest, and most excellent man who ever arrived in this place. What is more, I know quite well that you are not angry with me now, but with them, for you realize who is responsible. Now then, since you know what I have come to announce, fare you well and try to bear what must be as lightly as you can. And with this he began to weep, turned away and departed. And Socrates looked toward him and said, fare you well too.
Oh, that's Bruce now.
Yeah.
Fare you well too. We shall do as you ask. What a courteous man. Oh, that's right. What a courteous man. Throughout my
I think
time,
that's you, Bruce.
yeah. Throughout my time here, he has visited me and conversed with me sometimes and has been the best of men. And now, see how genuinely he weeps for me. But come now, Credo. Let us pay heed to him. Let someone bring the poison if it has been pressed, and if not, the man should press it.
Socrates, I think the sun is still upon the hills and has not set yet. What is more, I know that others have drunk the poison very late, whenever the announcement has been made to them. They have feasted and drunk quite a lot, some of them even fraternizing with people they happen to enjoy. So do not rush. There is still time.
Oh, it is quite reasonable for these people to do this, the people you describe, for they think there is benefit in doing so. And it will be reasonable for me not to do so, as I think there is no benefit in drinking the poison a little later, apart from becoming a figure of fun to myself by clinging to life and sparing what is already spent. So come on, heed me and do not refuse me.
And when Creto heard this, he nodded to his servant who was standing nearby, and the boy went out, was gone for quite some time, and returned, bringing the man who was going to administer the poison, carrying it already pressed in a cup. When Socrates saw the man, he said,
So be it, best of men, since you are knowledgeable about these things, what should I do?
Peter.
Nothing. Except drink this and walk about until your legs become heavy. Then lie down, and in this way the poison will act by itself.
and as he said this, he held the cup out to Socrates, and having taken it most graciously, Socrates, without fear or any change of color or expression, but looking at the man wide-eyed as usual, he said, who's the Socrates today? Oh, I was, yes. What do you say about pouring a libation to someone from this cup? Is that permitted or not?
Socrates, we only press the amount we think you need to drink.
I understand, but it is permitted and indeed necessary to pray to the gods that my change of abode from here to there be graced with good fortune, and so I pray that this may be so.
And as he said this, he put the cup to his lips, and very calmly and without flinching, he drank it down. Up to then, most of us were able to restrain our tears fairly well. But when we saw him drinking and saw that he had drunk it, we could do so no longer. In spite of myself, my own tears flowed in a torrent, and so I hid my face, weeping not for him, but for myself and my own misfortune at being deprived of such a companion. And even before that, when Creto was unable to restrain his tears, he had moved away. But Apollodorus, who had been weeping incessantly before then, broke out at this stage into such wailing and grieving that none of the company could help breaking down except Socrates himself.
Strange men. What a way to behave. I sent the women away mainly so that they would not cause such a tumult, for I have also heard that it is necessary to die in reverent silence. So keep quiet and endure.
And when we had heard this, we felt ashamed and refrained from weeping. He walked around until he said that his legs were becoming heavy. Then he lay flat on his back as the man had instructed. And this man who administered the poison began examining him. And when some time had passed, he probed his feet and legs, and then he pinched his foot hard and asked if he could feel it. He said no. And after this, the man felt his shin once more, and working upwards in this way, he showed us that he was going cold and stiff. And again he touched him and said that when it reached the heart, he would then be gone. Now, once the coldness was somewhere in the region of his groin, he uncovered his face, for it had been covered. And he said, this was his final utterance.
Phaedo, we owe a cock to Asclepius, so pay the debt without fail.
Yes, it shall be done, but see if you have something else to ask for.
To this question, he did not even reply. After a short time, he shuddered, and the man uncovered him, and his eyes were fixed. And when Crito saw this, he closed the mouth and eyes. That, Ischecrates, was the end of our companion, a man whom we should say was the best, most exceptionally wise, and most just of any we have ever known. End.
We did it. All right.
Yeah, that was a heavy reading section, that one.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Bruce.
Thank you, thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
So there's definitely a lot to chew on. Yeah, I don't necessarily expect us to unpack this, but what I could say is I've probably read this about 12 times so far, and I'm sure I'm going to read this another at least 12 times before my time to escape the mortal coil arrives. So there's always something new, right? That's gleaned that reshapes a lot of the associations that we've built up between our readings that's always giving and creating. So it's really quite an exceptional thing, and I'm sure you're all going to feel more of that going back and diving back into this dialogue over the years.
I'll just throw out a speculation there.
Mm.
Those regions that he describes, as he says, the earth that we see with our physical eyes is not the way he sees the earth, because he sees the earth he sees all these other regions, Tartarus and so on, the ones that he describes where the souls go. So the only thing we have in our scientific explorations so far, in my opinion, is string theory, which mathematically claims there are perhaps 10 dimensions, perhaps 26 dimensions, but we have no ability to see those dimensions. However, Socrates, because of his habit of composing music, as he calls it, the highest music, gathering his soul within himself and going away from the physical senses, including his mortal eyes, he has access from within to these dimensions which he can see. So that's my speculation. I'm going to leave it there. And this is what he encourages with philosophy also. He was encouraging the people he was accused of being, of corrupting, to find that higher dimension so they could see things the way they really are, because all those things are hidden from most people who see only the things that are going on here. They don't have access to what happens afterwards, whereas he does have access, as he indicates by describing in some detail. Although he says it would take him a very long time which he doesn't have to fully describe them. He gives a survey.
Well, there's definitely a shifting of gears that occurs when he goes off into the realm of describing his speculation about what occurs after in the afterlife. But he also says here, now it would not be appropriate for a man of intelligence to insist that matters are as I have recounted them, but that these considerations or something like them are applicable to our souls and the dwelling place. I mean, I think that for me was an important comment, where I
think that is consistent with his earlier statement that you should not take anything I say without chewing it yourself, without critically examining it yourself. So that's all. This is merely consistent with that. This is what I am saying. And the details he provides suggest that these are not mere speculations, but these are actual visions he has had. He's had actual connection to those places. That's how I would put it. But again, nobody should take anything I'm saying anything more than he counsels. Anybody should take the things that he says without examination.
Well, I think his
Come on.
oh, you okay there?
Right.
That's
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
Phone keeps dropping.
You know, I think in my assessment, his letter 7, you know, his famous letters of his famous letters that have survived, letter 7 is probably the best, where he describes, that's the only place where he really describes his personal Tao, in a sense, his method and what he'll say openly, what he won't say, to a friend. But I was thinking, like, you know,
Is that in the Phaedo? Is letter 7 in the Phaedo?
no, letter
No.
7 is
No.
letter 7. You could just Google Plato
It's
letter
letter
7.
Letter 7. Sorry, thank you.
But I think what he's always getting at, in that I've noticed in all of his dialogues, he's always dancing with the question of opinion, reality, knowledge, you know, right opinion, wrong opinion, how right opinion looks like knowledge, but it doesn't have the same quality because it can be swept away, like we were playing with in this dialogue. He's always doing that. And how the masses are always going to necessarily, you won't necessarily have everybody accessing the higher domain of, you know, Quan's, you know, 5th, 4th, 5th, 6th levels of epistemological development. That it just won't be the case. A lot of people will still be not within that, but we'll still need, he talks about myths a lot too, and myths that are destructive and myths that are good. And if you have a good solid foundation, you could have myths that actually enhance and give people better access to themselves and are not harmful. And then other myths are harmful. But I personally think he's sort of dancing that in that tune right now. I don't know, because I just don't see the same quality of rigor that he's displaying in every other part of the dialogue. It just seems like he's talking about things
No,
that in a different
I
way.
think he qualifies himself there, Matthew. He says it would take a lot more time than I have to describe this, but I'm going to give you a summary, something I don't recall his exact words, but that is the
No, he says that, but he also says in that I don't even think that I could, even if I could, you know. But he also says I don't even think because I think there's some
hear
language
this.
like that where he also said,
Here's
like, this
this,
is
hear
not
this.
something I know to be true. This is something I could describe a lot more.
No,
But he
I don't think
has a disclaimer there too.
I don't read that he says he doesn't know this. He just says he's not sure he can communicate this to you. And I'll give you an example where he talks about some of the highest regions where the purified souls will go, where they will never return to bodies. He talks, these regions are so beautiful, words could not even describe them. And I find an association between that and you know what Jesus said, my Father's house has many mansions, and the connection to me is there. It may not be to others, but he's talking about things he has actually seen with his mind's eye. And that's my take on it.
Okay.
He's just saying in his usual diffident manner where he says, I only know that I don't know everything. You know, he's the most wise guy, and he keeps saying, I don't know everything. I know what I don't know. You remember that part of his approach, that he, despite being the wisest guy, he's always ready to, you know, point out that he's just a human and so on. And
What I absolutely, one of the things I've loved about this material is the pictures painted and the concepts conveyed of the invisible realms, the spiritual realms, and that's not how the mainstream, when it refers to Plato or Socrates, in the rare occasions it does, they don't say that. They talk about philosophy and all this other, but that's not the brand, and it ought to be, because it echoes the dream time of many native tribal experiences. It reflects the experiences of those who've had near-death experiences. And it reflects, like Harinder was saying, what Jesus says. It reflects what Rumi and Khalil Gibran and Ralph Waldo Emerson and even Napoleon Hill and Think and Grow Rich, that this is my true north. I love that metaphor earlier, is that this is an entirely spiritual realm. And like Socrates says, it doesn't have to be true. It's just an idea that gives me power. And every day it gets confirmed by by many, many things like this reading, this discussion, and the orientation. You know, for the last year or so, I've really enjoyed all these experiences with Matt and the Rising Tide Foundation. And now, you know, I just had the privilege of reading all these passages that echo what I hear out of Matt for the last year. The good, the true, and the beautiful. Someone on this call just said that earlier. Was it Vincent? Was it Peter? I forget. Was it Kelly? The good, the true, and the beautiful. Maybe it was Paul. And then the synchronicities, like Declan, you started this thing with a backdrop kind of like mine. And then I heard you talk about acting. My God, that's all I did for the first 35 years of my life. That's all I did. Plus worry. You know, so just this whole, the freedom that comes from whatever it takes to convey the idea. Hey, why don't you look into developing a spiritual imagination? Just that's my Johnny Appleseed. That's my that's just a huge, wonderful takeaway from this tonight.
Yeah, I can readily agree with that one. That's for sure. The last, it probably has been 12 months since I joined Matthew's group, and he's not the only one that has forced me to re-examine people like Plato. I mean, I remember back to, this is 40 years ago, politics degree in university, doing the Republic. I mean, much of the discussion about that in tutorials and various other things was how much Plato's ideas in the Republic fed fascism. I mean, there is absolutely no attempt whatsoever to convey any understanding of a spiritual nature.
Yes.
And,
yes.
you know, I mean, I've also come across, you know, I mentioned it in one of the readings a while ago, that you know, there are people who regard a lot of, or there are a few researchers who regard a lot of Plato's dialogues as statements of music theory. Now, you know, knowing what I now know about science and resonance and harmony and all of those sorts of things, you can kind of see the connection, or that there is a broad outline of the connection. I mean, Matthew, the one you did on Help and Arp not long ago, Rising Tide Foundation thing leads into this, that resonance and harmony are going, in my opinion, in the end, to be far more important than anything to do with, you know, gravity and Einsteinian theories of relativity. And we're barely scratching the surface of that now. Our understanding of it is primitive.
Yeah.
But there are an awful lot of people talking about it. I mean, who was the gentleman that I saw? No, I just can't think of his name. 96-year-old guy. He's a Platonist in the extreme. I just can't remember. I'd have to look it up. But I saw a presentation yesterday, and this guy was talking along the same lines that we're talking now, and it was just a wonderful interview that I stumbled across. Unfortunately, the guy doing the questioning was a little bit insipid in terms of, and he readily admitted he didn't understand a lot of what the gentleman was talking about, but he wanted to get on record because this guy was 96. You know, he's not going to be around much longer.
Yeah.
Fascinating. I mean, there seems to be, and I you know, I credit Matthew with, if you like, you're not the only person, Matthew, but it seems to me at the moment there is a spreading of this kind of desire for rethinking ideas and notions and concepts, you know, in a world that just seems to be going completely nuts. We're all kind of looking for some way out of that stupidity and insanity. And as a as a solid boat on a stormy sea, everything that you do with the Rising Tide Foundation is certainly worth following, worth being a part of. And I say that to the whole community too, not just to you, Matthew.
Yeah. Here.
No,
Yeah.
thanks, Paul.
I would like maybe to read 5 lines from the dialogue, which I think are the main message of Plato and of Socrates to all of us, if it's okay. So the lines are, Socrates is speaking to Crito. I shall say what I always say, Crito, nothing new, that in caring for yourselves, you will be doing a service to me and mine and to yourselves. Whatever actions you may perform, even if you make no promises now. But if you do not care for yourselves and are not prepared to live your life based upon the path which accords with the declarations we have made now and on previous occasions, even if you make a lot of fervent promises now, nothing more would come of it. And I think it's a very moving 5 lines because it was his last message before dying, inviting everyone to the epistemological journey.
Mm.
And stating that invitation in very simple words.
Yeah. Yeah, that
Yes.
got to me too as well. The invitation to discover yourself and be true to yourself and love that process. If you just do that, you will resonate goodness and you will be a good influence on his kids and everybody else. So you don't have to give them direct prescriptions of like, do this, do this, do this, pay for my kids' education. No, you don't have to do any of those things. Make sure they're getting tutored. Like all of those things will just happen if you're just being good to your conscience and your truth.
Yes.
Matthew, I think he goes a little bit beyond that. He says there are higher dimensions, and his ultimate message has to be that epistemological journey is finding those higher dimensions where, as
Well,
Plato
the reason why I'm a little apprehensive just in your approach, Harinder, is that it's kind of like going to sleep. Like when you try to go to sleep, you don't go to sleep, right? The more you try to access something,
Yeah.
like you try to be creative, you're going to be less creative the more you try.
This is similar to
So-
Paul's idea that you also have to be rooted in the body. This is, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like the more you try to get to heaven, sometimes the further away heaven becomes, and I just think sometimes it's
Yes,
good to
if you do it with a fanatical zeal, yes,
loving
but what,
experience, which a lot of people sort of miss out on.
Yeah.
So all the born agains are a long way away, are they?
Well, a lot of variations.
What I get out of these sessions, the last 3 sessions we had, it's not necessarily is there a soul or isn't a soul. For me, it was just learning to ask the right questions, like and a very basic level. And
Wow.
and from there, like we could just by learning to ask the right questions, you could formulate so much from that ground level. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Kelly, that's not the ground level. That's the level of the aristocratic man.
Yeah.
Okay, and let's
Well,
not forget that the
It's a ground level
aristocratic.
for me.
Yes. well, Kelly, I'm absolutely delighted to meet one aristocratic man who ignore himself. So it's not the ground level, because if you know how to ask the right questions, you will get very easily the right answer. And I would say that it's one of the big lessons of the Socratic dialogues written by
Yeah.
Plato. And let's not forget that at the beginning of our discussion in the episode 1, I said that what is special with the Phaedo is that we make a quantum leap here. And precisely, we have, speaking of born again, is to be precisely born again than to be an aristocratic man. So, and from that base, you will be capable to go to the next step, a stage, what is truly being in all its glory. And precisely, it's because you're more capable to have your mind very open-minded, that you will ask the right question, and that you will be invited into the realm of being, precisely, of the Son of the Absolute. Because let's not forget that when you read a philosopher, you would always have to ask the question, is it a noble lie or is it a true description? Okay, the famous 5 or 6 last pages of the Beyond. Okay, I would like to suggest a hypothesis. Okay, it's not important to know if it's a noble lie or if it's a true description, even if it's a cursory description. What is important is, my pretension is that what is important is what he said to Crito: take care of yourselves. Okay, and I would say that yourselves here can be seen with a capital S. Take care of your soul. Make yourself remember that your soul is the master.
my last word of dissent, Matthew, your suggestion that Socrates was merely speculating in those last few pages when he laid out in details the things that he describes, the regions and the regions of Hades and what happens to which kind of soul. It is more in line with the noble lie. Whereas I think Socrates is too great a soul to have resorted to that. He would have given an honest statement of what he himself had experienced and seen. That's it. And that's my
Maybe.
final word.
Well, let's all live really good lives, and maybe we'll see the same thing and be able to confirm or disprove when the time comes. But if we all walk in
Everybody's going to
Socrates'
be held
shoes, right?
accountable. Right? Everybody's accountable for what what's that old saying? Was it Huxley who said it paradoxically? You pays your money and you takes your choice, or something like that.
Yep.
What? It pays your money and takes your choices?
I believe I read somewhere in Huxley, you pays your money and you takes your choice, meaning he restates it the opposite way. What you do, your choices will have a price that you will pay.
Oh, I see. Well, that's I think a high value takeaway as well, that whatever, whether we're coming from there's so many different cultures out there in the world that coexist and that are all, trying to be make sense of things in the best way possible, with being part of the human condition being what it is. There are some philosophies that emerge wrapped in different clothing, which pay no regard for the moral choices we choose to live by, and no regard for the sense of like something of the soul that can be made sicker or healthier. And then other philosophical ideas and religious ideologies and other things that pay more respect to these matters, and have a concept that there is an effect of our life being lived badly, that will resonate even after our bodies have died, or that will similarly, when we live well, that will have some consequences. And I think if we have that in mind, then we're going to get along with each other a lot more and find where our allies are and where also the weak parts are, that are being capitalized upon by the oligarchy.
That strand is there in most religions, Matthew, but it does get disguised. In the Hinduism, the concept of karma, in Christianity, you reap what you sow. So the ideas are all there, but then the religions, the bureaucracies take over, the priesthood takes over, and all manner of corruptions enter. I mean, this is the reason why this man Jesus had those arguments with the rabbis that he grew up with, because at some level, then the book learning interferes and prevents the actual walk on this path. So,
yeah.
But I think I've spoken too much already, so I'll just keep quiet.
No, I think you're right. The lesser part of us.
It's the same wine in different bottles. It's the same wine packaged in different bottles in different cultures, etc. But when you cut down through the details, the basic ideas are very similar, or if not the same, in my opinion.
Yep. Well,
I got one for you. We're talking about the summations and from unusual places. The very last line of the film A Bronx Tale with Robert De Niro and Ches Palminteri. They said, "The choices you make will shape your life forever."
And maybe your afterlife.
Yeah.
Oh, but that's it. Oh, but shape your life forever. I get it. That's good.
Forever. So we're becoming eternal.
I like it.
Entering
I like it.
eternity here.
And even more popular source, if you let the dark side influence you forever, it will dominate your destiny. That's from
Star Wars. Oh.
And on that note, may the force be with you.
May the force be with us.
All right, guys. Yeah, this is a wonderful journey, and we're, I guess, next week what we'll do. There's something that I would like for people to get to know Kepler a little bit, and there's something that Kepler did. There's quite a lot of things that he did, but there's one thing that I think is a pretty nice follow up to what we just finished reading, which is Kepler's most concise metaphysical treatise in book 4 of the Harmonies of the World. So I'm gonna find a PDF of that, share it, and I think that would be a fun little thing to dive into, where he directly cites Plato, specifically Plato's proof of the immortality of the soul, as having direct bearing upon his life and how he accomplished what he did in a very self-aware way. On the process of proving that the orbits of the planets are harmonically ordered around the sun. So yeah, let's do that next Wednesday, and we'll go from there.
Can I make a specific request in relation to that?
Sure.
If you find the PDF, could you email it to us beforehand and give us a chance to read it?
Sure. Yeah, I'll upload
Yeah.
it on the Rising Tide site so people could just
I
download it.
mean, with this one, for example, you did that with the Phaedo. On the first email that I got about this particular session, it came with the PDF. And
Yeah,
I was
sometimes
able to read.
I speed up and
I was able to
forget
read
do
most
stuff
of
like
it
that.
beforehand, and whilst reading it by yourself is very different from reading it in a group and having discussions about it.
Totally.
It would be good with the Kepler one to read it in advance.
What was the name of the Kepler book we're going to be
Called
reading?
Harmonies of the World. Harmonici Mundi is
I
his
think I
Latin.
already have that downloaded.
Okay, well you're
So-
you're ahead of the game, but I'll make sure I put that out there pretty soon.
Thank you.
Thank
All right,
you.
guys.
Hey, thanks, Matt.
Bye.
Hey, Matt.
Bye,
Hey,
everybody.
Enjoyed this.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks all. Thanks, Matt. Good night.
Today.